So what we're going to add in is notifications. Notifications for different things, combos. We want it to be kind of a floating text effect. The first thing I need to do is I need to identify a font. So we're going to go to font, download. Let's go back here to do a true type font download. Let's find one that would work for this game. I sort of like this. Ugh, that's horrible. Let's look at these a little bit more. This one's pretty nice, a little bit small for my use case. That's a little bold. This one's probably pretty all right. This one, if I wanted to take up more space, but I'm sort of digging this one. So let's bring this in. We're going to download the font. What? All right. My bad, guys. Okay, we want this one. We're going to bring this true type font into Unity. Under my resources, make a new folder in here, call it fonts, add this one in here. Okay, when I look at this, smooth 16 font name looks good. Let's do a window TextMesh Pro font asset creator. And we're going to add this font with auto sizing, auto padding, and generator assets. This is our font for the game. And we're going to save this as Gotham SDF asset. So immediately here in my score container, we can change this font out with this Gothic asset that we created. And the same thing with the Game Over panel. Already looks a lot better. And the next little bit that we want is we want to have notifications. So let's close this panel. And let's think about how we want these notifications to happen. Do we want them to be on the UI layer? Do we want them to be on a game layer? We could also use render targets, so we could put them on a different layer and then render them as we need them. What comes to mind for me is like a UI animation. And if I did it on a render target, I would still make it at the same scale size and overlay it directly on top. If I made them as UI assets, they wouldn't be able to move easily because their positioning gets screwed up when it can't scale. That's where the render target comes into effect. So do I want these to be floating text? Probably, right? And we want the floating text to be somewhat above or below where our game objects are located. So real quickly, what I believe I'm going to do is I'm going to make a world canvas for this. But I'm going to check to see what I've done in a previous project where I did the same thing, just to make sure everything is ideal. Second as it loads. because I want to make this, I think, on the world canvas and have them instantiate individually on the blocks, have some kind of detection to make sure that it's shown on the right side of the screen, but exist in world space. So let's do that to get started. The first thing I want to do is I want to create a new game object called a canvas, and I'm going to call this a floating text script. Floating text. Put this in the world space on my game camera. And we'll add on this a new UI Text Mesh Pro. I'm going to change the font to the new font we brought in here. And I'll say this is like a test text. It's interesting I don't see it because it's on world space. Maybe I just want it as an overlay on this. I really want this as a game object. Does I can make a tag and a text for Text Mesh Pro as a game object. That might be what I want. Let's try this for a second. So we're going to drop this thing to a new 3D object called text. And this is rendering as a mesh renderer. So I could actually just change the size of this, right? And it's going to affect everything. Okay. This actually has a regular game position. That's interesting. That's new for me. This is pretty fancy that we can do it this way. So that means that I can just make a whole new game object here, and I could call this floating text. By the way, we can check the other project that I was going to look at just to see how I was going to do this, or how I did do this in the past, but I'm not a fan probably. Which is in the floating score. This is a prefab asset. And you have this floating text canvas world, which is in world space. But it looks like this has been deprecated because I can just do this right in this layer. So I'm going to say that this is my text box. Just text. And we're going to say that this thing is a sprite material. If I play and reset, it should be fine. Okay, change this to be the sprite material. Yeah, it doesn't care. And then we want to change the font here to be Gotham's. And then we can say that this is going to be my They got real smart with this. This is still a rect transform on a transform. That's not what we want. We want to add this as a 3D Text Mesh Pro object. It's still adding a rect transform. So we could also do something where we make a new canvas and we make it a world canvas. And we put it at 0, 0. Just a second. And our anchors are at 0, 0 and 0.5, 0.5. And our width will be 1980 by whatever, 1080. And we want to put the camera on here. And now what I want to do is create a new UI Text Mesh Pro. That doesn't seem right. Do I want the text as a game object? If I look at this, it's always coming in as a rect transform, no matter where I put it. See? So it wants to be on the UI layer. So let's add a new game object onto here, and we're going to call this floating text. And we'll spread the whole thing out here. And I want to create a new game object called floating text. And we'll put this at 0.5, 0.5. And now I want to add a new UI layer, which is called Text Mesh Pro. And we're going to call this floating text content. Drop this thing down to be 18. Dump it in the middle, and then make our overflow here no wrapping. So now I only have one position, so I should be able to move things safely. And if my aspect ratio were to change, it looks like it's still readable and legible. So we'll start with this. I want to create a new animation for this. And I'm going to say that this is a alert and here we want to add a new animator controller called alert AC, and then we'll add two animations, one called idle and one called action. We're going to put this on floating text so that way content is separated. The size doesn't matter anymore. It's just a point. So when I look at my animator, I can add in my animations here for idle and action. And we want to have a transition here, which will be on a trigger called action. And we want to say it has an exit time. It does not have an exit time, and its fixed duration is 1, something like that. And we want to say that the condition is when action. And on the other side, we want to say it doesn't have a, say it has an exit time of 0 and 0. Okay. And so now on the animation itself, what I want to do is look at my idle animation, and we want to make my content have a size of 0, 0, 0. And on action, we want to have it as a 1, 1, 1 at 0.000. And then somewhere at like a second and a half plus a little bit, we want to have this thing moved up a bit. Maybe like 60. And on the curve, that smoothed it out for me. And I'm pretty happy with that. And so now what I want to do is I want to add a new script onto this called effect floating text. And we want this to have a text mesh pro U GUI on it. And the only thing I want to have on this is a new public virtual void set text, and we're just going to have a string here called content, and we'll say text equals content. And also we need to have on here a protected, and it's a animator called animator. We want to add a require component type of animator under this. And then we want to have a protected virtual void awake, where we set my animator equals to a get component, which is a type of animator. And then you want to do a animator dot set trigger to action. So when this gets fired, that would be from my UI script. We want to have something which is a public we'll do this from the pool manager. So I want to add a new public virtual void set floating text. And I want to do this at a vector2, which is a position, and also a string for the text. And all I want to do is a global manager.pool manager.create take object from pool, and I want to use the base object type called a floating text. And then we're going to do a floating text dot get component, and it's a effect floating text. And then I want to do a floating text script dot set text to be my text. And you also want to do a floating text dot transform dot position is equal to my position. So back in Game Manager, for each one of my lines, I want to do a UI dot set floating text here. To be on the line dot center, and we want to say that the line is you got points, and we'll change this. Let's rebuild it. And this time we're going to add on here a floating text effect. And we'll add in the content and save this as a prefab. And then on my UI, so back in the game engine, we need to create this as a prefab in the pool manager. And we're going to add a third type, which is called a floating text, and we'll add in the floating text. Try that. So now when I get points, this is saying what's null. What is happening with my editor? Here, floating text script, because it didn't find the effect floating text on it, on what it instantiated, which is not here. Because it's on the child. Try it again. So it instantiated my floating text. It didn't put it in my canvas. So this one's going to take just a little bit more work to get this floating up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the current build, I'm going to dump it onto pixelhorrorstudios.com, so that way we can test out the effects. And then tomorrow morning we'll be streaming first thing, probably 5:30 to 6:30 a.m. And we will be tackling the grouping of the objects, and that's also going to output to the notification system that we're adding in right now. Thanks so much for staying with me today. I'll see you guys in the morning. Say 6:30 or so. If you have any questions, make sure you pump them into chat, discord.pixelhorrorstudios.com. I also put all these videos up at youtube.pixelhorrorstudios.com. Thank you again, and see you guys a lot later. Have a great rest of your night. Bye.